So while we have discussed interviewing in class, we're going to talk a little bit more what goes on the employer side of the interview. I personally had experience from the employer side of interviews at my internship at Kloss, which is the manufacturing industry.
I had experience on the employer side at my internship this past summer on the hiring side with Delaware North.
And I had experience in the financial industry in my high school job.
So everyone's probably wondering why we should care about the employer side of the interview if we're going to be on the other side most of the time, but we think it's important to know, what goes on the other side of the interview as well.
So when you go into an interview, you want to go in prepared. You want to do your research on the company and brainstorm a few questions to ask them, because at the end of the interview, when they ask you if you have any questions, you don't want to say that you don't have any, because this shows that you didn't prepare for the interview. So a good place to look to brainstorm some questions is to look at the skills section in the job description. Oh, we're going to watch a short video about interview tips.
We'll review how to answer interview questions properly before the video as well. The interviewer is trying to get to know you, so don't make them dig for answers. Never answer a question with just a simple yes or no. Even if someone doesn't ask for a specific example, always try to provide one wherever you can. Anyone can say that I'm very organized or they work well under pressure, but just because you say it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Always try to give an example that exemplifies those attributes that you're speaking of. Of course, there's going to be times where you're asked specific behavioral-based questions. An example of that might be a difficult negotiation you had with a client where you had to persuade them to agree to the terms. When answering a question like that, you want to answer correctly but concisely. The correct way to answer these types of questions are by listing the situation, the action, and the result. You want to set up the situation in 1 to 2 sentences. Then you want to talk about the obstacle and the action you used to overcome that obstacle. Lastly, you want to talk about the result and how you resolve that situation. They don't need to know every little detail about the situation. You're not talking to your friend. They just need to know the essentials, enough to understand the situation and how you came out on top.
So when you go into an interview, most employers are going to ask you behavioral questions that are going to better evaluate you as a potential employee. And LinkedIn determined the 6 soft skills that were most important to an employer. And these are adaptability, culture add, potential growth, leadership and collaboration, and prioritization.
So this past summer, I had the opportunity to internship as an executive human resources assistant at Honeycomb Resort, which is a Parks and Resorts property of Delaware North, which is one of the largest hospitality companies in the world. They are privately owned by the Jacobs family, and they own everything from different parks and resorts to catering companies that cater the Grammys and the Oscars to owning the Boston Bruins hockey team as well. So in my interview experience at my internship, we used the STAR system when we were interviewing our potential candidates. This means the situation, task, action, and result that these candidates would give as we were asking them questions during the interview. During these questions, when we'd ask them, we would look for very thoughtful responses. So like we mentioned, doing your research, having those potential questions and answers to have, and really taking your time and not just spouting something off from the top of your head. We want you to have good, thoughtful responses when we ask you a question. This being a hospitality industry, we had a wide range of jobs that we interviewed for. So this went everything from a waitress or waiter to a golf grounds position to a general accountant and a general manager. So everything from hourly to salary positions. So some of our interviewing central points that we used during our interviews is we looked at 2 main things that we really looked for when you came in for your interview. We wanted you to come dressed nicely. These kind of varied based on positions. So positions such as a waitress or golf groundskeeper, usually they would come in with jeans with no holes in them, a nice shirt with no stains, but for positions such as a general accountant, you would wear your business attire of slacks and a button-up shirt and a tie. The second thing that we really looked for when we were interviewing you is your teamwork skills. Because in a hospitality industry, you work with other employees and the customers as well. Those were things that we really looked for to stand out in your interview of how you worked in a team.
So Ashley got this point system from her staffing class, and I had previous experience as a bank teller, so I was gonna explain a little bit more why the points are as they are. So when you're interviewing to be a bank teller, they want you to have a high school diploma because of the computer and math skills that you will learn in your high school classes. And it's more preferred that you have either an associate's degree or a bachelor degree because a lot more education classes go more in depth into like loans and financial processes, and so that's what you'll get more in those degrees. Fortunately, I was able to observe all of these processes hands-on and learn how to do loan advances and account transfers, which you typically wouldn't learn in a college program or high school.
So this point system is a great example of how in an interview with the requirements that are listed on the job description, how they would kind of score you in that interview based on your qualifications that you had going in. Amber had a great example of how she gained more experience in the job than you would get in, per se, a bachelor's level education. So these points are pretty set in stone, but sometimes they can be manipulated based on your past experience as well.
Another thing they focus on is work experience. So as a bank teller, they want you to have previous experience as a cashier because that's where you learn how to do the basic cash drawer processes. They would also like you to have experience as a billing clerk because those are the people that have more knowledge about issuing credits and debits, and they're able to perform the banking tasks better. And it's preferred that you have previous bank teller experience because once you're a bank teller, you already know what everything in the banking industry means and how to do everything. The only thing that's going to vary from bank to bank is the computer systems that they use or maybe some personal policies at the bank. So once you're a bank teller, you can pretty much be a bank teller anywhere.
So Amber and Ashley both have experience in the hospitality industry and the banking industry, but this summer I had an HR internship at Claas. They're an agriculture machinery manufacturing company. Does anyone know? Ever heard of Claas? No. Okay, so they're based out in Europe. That's where their headquarters are. So they're basically like a John Deere. That's like their biggest competitor. So I worked in the HR department in Omaha, Nebraska. They were a manufacturer. So of course every company and industry has their different processes of interviewing, but for my internship I focused on recruiting and staffing the people who worked out on the floor at Claas in Omaha. And so with this presentation, my supervisor gave me some of her interviewing slides that she gives to her hiring managers. So basically, you guys will get an inside look on what goes on when they train the interviewers for the people on the manufacturing floor. So getting started. So preparing for the interview, just like candidates, employers have to prepare for interviews as well. So the very first step in preparing for an interview is to conduct a job analysis. A job analysis is basically kind of like an interview with the person that has the position, and basically asking them about their day-to-day responsibilities and what they do every day. And then from there, you will move on to the job description and then work on the knowledge, skills, and abilities that is needed for the position. And then, so this is the an example of one of the job descriptions that we had to go through. So right now, this is an assembly technician, so this is primarily what I had hands-on experience in the hiring. So as you can see, there's the job summary, the essential functions, the other functions, and then the requirements. The essential functions were mainly what we looked at when trying to figure out, what questions we were going to ask for the position.
So that can come into play too with your side of it coming in as a candidate. When you look at this job description, you want to look at the essential functions and the requirements, because that can give you hints of maybe if you're unsure of what one of those requirements or what the essential functions are, you can ask clarifying questions. When they ask you in that part of the interview, do you have any questions? Say something as, I took a look at your job description for this position, I noticed this specific function, what all does this entail? I was not very clear on it when I looked at the job description.
Okay, so this is an example of what most employers will use when you are interviewing for a job. This isn't the one that my company used, I couldn't get it, but this is what most of them will look like.
So this would be kind of an example of similar to what we showed with Amber's bank teller example. This is kind of more overall for the whole interview, whereas with Amber's example, it showed specific requirements that were listed on the job description and how they scored from there. So this is just kind of an example of, during your overall interview, how your interviewer is scoring you.
And then, so this is an example of a 5-point scale that is used for a guideline when we're doing the rating per questions. It is an example of a question that we would use when we're ranking this kind of these questions. So why do you think you are the best candidate for this position? So this is basically just a simple question that we do in the beginning before the behavioral questions for an assembly technician. As you can see, a well-answered or a well-qualified candidate would get a 5, and then a 2 to 4 you are qualified, and then so on. The next one is the per competency rating. A lot of companies use this today, particularly in the manufacturing industry, is what I kind of learned, I guess. Basically, you'll get the competency ratings from the behavioral questions. So now you're probably wondering, what is a good score? We'll typically hire people for an on-the-floor position that is an assembly technician, anywhere between a 3 and a 5, and then we sometimes hire people who fit into a 2, but they would more than likely have to have additional training in that area of the particular competency. And then this is an example of an overall interview rating. So this would be, after all of the ratings, this would be at the end of the interview for the assembly technicians. But we use all 3 of these ratings at the company that I interned at. So this is, so after we, if we want to move forward with the candidate, this is an example of something that we have to go through before we make the final decision. The fit gap analysis is pretty important at my company because the manufacturing plant is ISO certified, which that means basically you have to follow the special documentation and requirements to with different departments. So this is one of the ISO certifications or documents that we had to do for hiring people. So for example, we would go through the candidate's resume and the rating scale sheets, and we would go through one by one. So if the candidate had a minimum high school degree, we would check that they have a fit in that area. And then, for example, if they didn't have the ability to read a blueprint, we would have to check that they have a gap, and we would not be able to hire them. So this process is pretty important because of the quality assurance standards that we have to follow, because these people that are, the assembly technicians work directly with the machinery that are going to our customers. That's
So
very
this is a
important.
good example too in the hospitality industry. We would use a fit gap analysis for salaried positions because it was very critical that they were able to do their roles and requirements that were written in the job description to do their job every day. In our hourly positions, it became a little unclear that with training and other things, they would be able to eventually reach those skill sets, so we would not use the fit gap analysis with those at lower level hourly positions. So it's a good example of how in different areas where you're hiring that these may seem very absolute, but they can be kind of foggy in some areas as well.
So, at my company, after you get your offer letter, it's contingent, or, yeah, that's the word, based upon your reference check and your, criminal background, your background check. And so a lot of people overlook, your reference checks. They actually are pretty important. If you have a bad reference, you will not get hired. I mean, before I worked at Kloss, I didn't really realize the importance of reference checks, and they really do play an important role in the hiring process.
At Delaware North, we had what was called a pre-hire process. We would do our initial interview with them. If we decided that their interview was worthy of them being hired, we would start a criminal background check. And while we were waiting for that criminal background check to come back, we would do their reference checks as well. So they would not get officially hired with their offer letter and their wage and everything else unless they pass that background check and their reference checks as well. So that pre-hire process can make or break them as an employee at our company. So some unique questions that you guys wanted us to tell you on how to answer questions during an interview, because most interviewers are going to ask you, do you have any questions for me? Obviously, like Amber said earlier, you do not want to say, no, I don't have any questions, thank you, have a great day. You want to have at least 1 or 2 questions prepared so that way you look like you prepared for this interview and didn't just go in completely unprepared. So the first one is, what is the biggest opportunity for this role? This shows that you're really looking for different ways you can strive and succeed in that role that you're interviewing for. What is the most challenging element of this role? This can kind of give you an idea of what some of the difficult things you might have to do in this potential job could be, and so you can be a little more better prepared for that if you were to get hired. What does success look like in this position? This shows that you want to grow in the company, or that there is room for improvement or room for you to work your way up the ladder. Does your company have a training program for this position? This can show that you're interested in learning more about this position and you're not just being stagnant with what they're requiring. You want to learn more and improve as well.
Another thing you guys wanted to know was how to answer a question if you don't have an answer for it. It's okay to take your time, as long as you acknowledge that you understood the question. So a great way to do that is just to say, great question, let me think about it. This will allow you a few seconds to get your thoughts together and then give them a correct answer. You can also think aloud. So interviewers don't want you to blurt out the right answer. They want you to they want to be able to see how you think through processes. So if they ask you a situational question that you've never been in, a great way to answer that is to imagine you've had that experience and then use words like first, then, and last in your answer. You can also redirect the question. So if you can't answer the question because you don't have the particular skill that they want you to have, you can redirect it to a similar skill. You're better off connecting it to a different skill than admitting that you don't have that skill at all. And then a great way to also answer it is always have a fail-safe. So if you're asked a specific question about like a definition of a term that relates to that industry and you have no idea what it is, you can focus on your enthusiasm for the position and knowledge that you have of the industry and the company that you're working or that you're interviewing with. So you can explain how you've been researching the industry and the company and that you're eager to learn more as you work in that position.
Okay, so quiz time. Do you guys think by show of hands that employers can ask the following? What languages can you read and write frequently? By show of hands, how many of you do you think that employers can ask this? Yes? No? The answer is actually no. You can only ask the languages that are pertinent to the job. This could easily be a question inquiring about the candidate's heritage. So can employers ask, what was your cumulative college GPA? Yes? No? Yes, when interviewing for a position that requires a degree professional, they may ask about your cumulative GPA.
Can employers ask, how long do you expect your spouse will be stationed here? How many of you think yes? No? You're correct with no. This involves you asking about their military status, which you're not allowed to ask about. You say you're a part of the National Guard. How long do you expect to have to be gone at a time for training? How many of you think yes? No? Again, no is correct. It is required by law that if you are in the military, it is required for them to give you the time off for training required by the government.
So if your job that you're interviewing for requires that you can lift at least 35 pounds, can they ask if you've had any injury that would prevent you from meeting this requirement? Yes? No? So you actually can't ask that question. You can ask if they can lift 35 pounds, but you can't ask if they've had a previous injury that would affect that. And then how long do you expect to remain in the workforce before considering retirement? How many people think you can ask that? No? You're correct because it has to do with age. Are there any questions?
So how would you answer that if someone said, how long do you plan to work in the work environment? If somebody asked me that, probably not gonna ask you guys that, but if they ask me that, what do I say? That's an illegal question, we're not going to answer that.
Yeah.
I would say, I'm sorry, I respectfully decline to answer that question. That would be my recommendation. Although I would never ask that question because I know it would be not appropriate, but.
Alright. So now we hope you guys know a little bit more about what goes on the employer side of the interview. Questions?